On the morning Daniel Carter buried his wife, the city sent him a final notice. Not condolences. Not mercy. Just red ink on white paper telling him he had 30 days to vacate the only home his daughter still called safe. Daniel folded the letter slowly, slipped it into his coat, and held his daughter's hand tighter as the casket lowered into the ground. No one there knew that the quiet man standing in the rain had once saved this city from collapse. No one knew he had built fortunes, broken tyrants, and walked away with nothing but scars. And no one, absolutely no one, suspected that the men trying to evict him were already standing on ground that belonged to him. Before this story unfolds, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories reach more people who need a reminder that strength doesn't always shout, and justice always finds its moment. Now, let me tell you how Daniel Carter disappeared, and why the city would soon regret it. Daniel Carter learned how to become invisible long before the world gave him a reason to hide. He was standing in line at the unemployment office when he realized it had finally happened. No one looked at him. Not the exhausted mother bouncing a toddler on her hip. Not the man in a wrinkled suit rehearsing lies for an interview he wouldn't get. Not even the clerk behind the glass, who stamped forms with robotic indifference. Daniel had once commanded rooms where silence fell when he entered. Now, he stood in a government building that smelled like stale coffee and resignation, holding a folder so thin it barely justified the effort. Beside him, his daughter Emma swung her legs on the plastic chair, humming softly to herself. She was 8 years old. Too old to believe everything would magically be okay. Too young to understand why it wasn't. "Daddy," she whispered, careful not to disturb the heavy air. "Are we going to move again?" Daniel knelt in front of her, forcing his face into something that resembled certainty. "Not if I can help it," he said. Emma studied him the way children do when they sense cracks adults try to hide. "You always help it," she said quietly. That sentence hurt more than the eviction notice. 3 months earlier, Daniel had been a husband, a provider, a man with a plan. Then came the accident, a drunk driver, a red light, a phone call delivered by someone who couldn't meet his eyes. Grief didn't arrive like a storm. It came like fog, slow, suffocating, erasing landmarks Daniel used to navigate his life. And while he was drowning, the world kept charging rent. The house they lived in sat on the edge of an old neighborhood. Brick homes, fading paint, history stitched into every cracked sidewalk. Developers had circled it for years, waiting for weakness. They smelled it now. The letter in Daniel's coat pocket wasn't a request. It was a threat dressed as procedure. 30 days. After that, the locks would change. What the letter didn't know, what no one in this city knew, was that Daniel Carter had signed deals worth more than the entire block without ever putting his name on paper. 10 years ago, his face had been everywhere. Business magazines. Panels. Interviews where people asked how it felt to win. Daniel had smiled then. He'd believed visibility was power. He learned the truth the hard way. The higher you rise, the louder the knives sharpen. When a corporate war turned personal, when boardrooms turned hostile and friends became liabilities, Daniel made a choice no one understood. He vanished, sold everything, transferred ownerships through layers so deep even forensic accountants got lost. Changed his name, changed his life. And when he met Sarah, when he became a husband, then a father, he believed the past had finally let him go. But power has a memory, and cities remember who built them. That afternoon, Daniel walked Emma home through streets that pretended not to notice them. A black SUV idled across the street from their house. It wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. 2 men stood beside it, laughing too loudly, suits too clean for the neighborhood. One of them glanced at Daniel and checked a clipboard. "That's him," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Daniel felt Emma's fingers tighten around his. "Daddy, who are they?" Daniel opened the front door, ushered her inside, and closed it gently. "People who think they know something," he said. From the window, he watched the men tape a bright orange notice to his door. "Fine Levive ECO1RIN." Emma read it before he could pull it down. Her voice cracked. "Are they taking our house?" Daniel peeled the paper away slowly, folded it once, and set it on the table. "No," he said. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just with a certainty that came from remembering who he used to be. That night, after Emma fell asleep clutching her mother's old sweater, Daniel opened a laptop he hadn't powered on in years. He didn't log into email. He didn't search for help. He opened a secure file hidden beneath layers of digital dust. Inside were names, accounts, companies that officially no longer existed, and one phone number. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. "Daniel Carter," he said when the call connected. "I need you to wake the city up." There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice replied, low and steady. "I was wondering when you'd come back." The man on the other end of the line didn't ask how Daniel had been. He didn't offer condolences. Didn't pretend the years apart mattered. People like Marcus Hale never wasted words on sentiment. "They're moving faster than usual," Marcus said. "That means someone's nervous." Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, watching rain trace crooked lines down the window. Outside, the black SUV was gone, but its absence felt louder than its presence ever had. "Who's behind it?" Daniel asked. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Officially, a redevelopment firm called Northline Urban Solutions. Unofficially, 3 shell companies, 2 political donors, and 1 man who likes to own neighborhoods the way others collect watches." Daniel closed his eyes. "Van Whitmore," he said. Marcus paused. Just a fraction of a second. "So you do remember?" Marcus replied. "I never forget men like him," Daniel said. "I just hoped he'd forget me." Whitmore was a parasite wrapped in a tailored suit, smiling for cameras while hollowing cities from the inside. He didn't build. He extracted. He bought influence, crushed resistance, and called it progress. And now he wanted Daniel's street. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked. Daniel looked down the hallway toward Emma's room. "Nothing," he said. "Not yet." Silence stretched between them. Marcus finally chuckled, low and humorless. "You're still that man." "That man kept people alive," Daniel replied. "This one just wants his daughter to sleep in her own bed. 30 days isn't much time." "It's more than enough," Daniel said. He ended the call before Marcus could argue, because this part, the waiting, was where wars were decided. 2-2 at precisely 8:03 the next morning, Daniel walked Emma to school. He wore the same worn jacket, the same scuffed boots. He moved like a man whose life had shrunk to simple routines. But he paid attention. A new sedan idled near the corner. Different car. Same intent. Across the street, a woman pretended to scroll on her phone while taking photos of the house. Developers never trusted paperwork alone. They trusted pressure. Emma noticed too. "They're back," she whispered. Daniel squeezed her hand once. "They won't hurt us." She didn't ask how he knew. Children sense when answers are bigger than words. By noon, the pressure escalated. A city inspector knocked. Then another. Then a letter from the bank claiming an administrative discrepancy. Every interaction followed the same script. Polite smiles, firm deadlines, veiled threats. Daniel documented everything. He let them talk. Let them feel powerful. Predators grew careless when prey didn't run. 2 across town, Evan Whitmore sipped espresso in a glass-walled office overlooking the river. "They're still there?" he asked, irritation sharpening his voice. His assistant nodded. No resistance. No lawyers. Just silence. Whitmore frowned. Silence bothered men like him. Noise meant fear. Silence meant something else. Move the timeline up, he said. If they won't leave willingly, remind them they don't belong. Whew, that night, the power went out. Not the block. Just Daniel's house. Emma froze when the lights died. Daddy. Daniel was already moving. Flashlight, phone. Front door locked. A brick lay shattered on the porch, a note taped to it. Final meas, final. Emma's breathing quickened. Daniel knelt, steady, calm in a way that frightened even himself. This is just noise, he said softly. Remember what I told you about storms? She nodded, eyes shining. They're loud, she whispered, but they pass. Daniel smiled. Yes, he said, and sometimes storms wash things clean. After Emma fell asleep, Daniel stood alone in the dark kitchen. He made one call. This time, he didn't ask. Activate phase 1, he said. Marcus didn't hesitate. They won't see it coming. Daniel looked out at the street. The cameras, the watchers, the city pretending not to notice. They never do, Daniel said. And somewhere deep beneath the city's polished surface, the first gears began to turn. The first sign came quietly, the way real trouble always does. At 6:17 a.m., even Whitmore's phone buzzed while he was halfway through his morning run along the river. He ignored it at first. Whitmore believed in controlling his day, not reacting to it. Second vibration made him slow his pace. By the third, he stopped completely. He glanced at the screen and frowned. 5 missed calls. All from the same number. His chief financial officer. Whitmore wiped sweat from his brow and answered. What is it? He snapped. If this is about Northline's permits, I already told you. They're frozen. The CFO interrupted, voice tight. Whitmore stopped walking. Explain. The city flagged the accounts overnight. Not just Northline. Every subsidiary. They're citing irregular capital flows and historical ownership discrepancies. That's impossible, Whitmore said immediately. Those structures were vetted years ago. They were. The CFO agreed, which means someone reopened files no one looks at anymore. Someone who knew exactly where to look. Whitmore felt the first flicker of something unfamiliar. Unease. Fix it, he said. Call whoever you need. There was a pause. That's the problem, the CFO said. The calls aren't being returned. The line went dead. Whitmore stood alone on the path, runners passing him without a glance, the city still believing he owned it. Plus, Daniel Carter poured cereal while listening to the morning news. Emma sat at the table, swinging her feet, half asleep. City officials announced a temporary review of several major redevelopment projects pending internal audit. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't react. He just turned the volume down when Emma looked up. Is that about our street? She asked. Not yet, Daniel said. Eat your breakfast. She nodded, trusting him in the way only children could. 2-2. By mid-morning, Northline Urban Solutions was in crisis mode. Lawyers crowded conference rooms. Assistants whispered. Emails went unanswered. Whitmore arrived at the office to find his legal team pale and unprepared. Who's doing this? He demanded. No idea. One of them admitted. The requests are coming from multiple departments. Finance, zoning, ethics. It's coordinated. Whitmore slammed his hand on the table. No one coordinates against me, he said. Find the source. But sources were shadows. And shadows don't testify. That afternoon, a city worker knocked on Daniel's door. Different from the others. Older. Careful eyes. Hands that shook slightly as he held out a clipboard. Test to pus. Remove the eviction notice, the man said. Daniel said nothing. There's been a temporary suspension. The worker continued. Pending review. Emma peeked from behind Daniel's leg. Does that mean we can stay? She asked. The man swallowed. For now. Daniel nodded once. Thank you, he said. The man hesitated, then lowered his voice. Off the record, someone up top asked very specific questions about this property. Questions people don't usually ask. Daniel met his eyes. Yes, Daniel said. They do. 2. That night, Whitmore stared at documents spread across his desk. Old documents. Names he hadn't seen in years. Ownership chains that didn't end where they were supposed to. One name kept appearing in footnotes and abandoned filings. Carter Holdings. Whitmore frowned. The name stirred something distant, uncomfortable. He opened a private database and ran a search. The file was sealed. That shouldn't have been possible. Whitmore's jaw tightened. No, he muttered. He pulled up a photograph from a decade earlier. A conference panel, all confident smiles and expensive suits. There, calm and unreadable at the edge of the frame, stood a man Whitmore had once tried to destroy. Daniel Carter. Whitmore's phone slipped from his hand and hit the desk with a dull thud. Outside, the city lights flickered. Not out, just enough to be noticed. And for the first time in years, even Whitmore understood a truth. He'd built his empire pretending wasn't real. Some men don't disappear. They wait. Whitmore didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office long after the city quieted, staring at the reflection in the glass, as if the answer might appear behind his own eyes. Daniel Carter wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Whitmore had made sure of that. Back then, it had been subtle. Leaked doubts, poisoned introductions, regulatory pressure applied just hard enough to force a retreat. Daniel had vanished before Whitmore could finish the job. At the time, Whitmore had congratulated himself on efficiency. Now, he understood the mistake. You don't wound a man like Daniel Carter. You either end him or you leave him alone forever. Whitmore reached for his phone and made a call he hated making. I need a favor, he said when the line connected. No paper. No names. The voice on the other end chuckled. That kind of favor costs more than money. Whitmore stared out at the city he thought he owned. Then consider this an investment. Daniel knew when the shift happened. Pressure has a rhythm. So does panic. The watchers on the street changed. Less polished, more aggressive. A man sat in a car across from the house for hours without pretending to be on his phone. Another followed Daniel 2 blocks on his walk back from the grocery store before turning away too late. Emma noticed. They're different. She whispered that night. Yes, Daniel said. They are. Is that bad? Daniel considered the question. It means we're close, he said. 2 days later, Daniel received a knock that wasn't from the city. A woman stood on the porch, early 30s, sharp eyes, clothes too plain to be fashion and too expensive to be accidental. Mr. Carter, she said. I'm not here officially. Daniel stepped aside without speaking. Inside. She declined the chair and remained standing, scanning the room with practiced restraint. My name doesn't matter, she said. But I represent people who are concerned about what's happening downtown. Daniel poured himself coffee. Concern is cheap, he said. Action is not. She studied him more carefully now. You've destabilized a major development initiative, she said. Jobs? Contracts? Political promises? I paused theft? Daniel replied. Don't dress it up. Her jaw tightened. You could walk away, she said. Take compensation. Disappear again. Daniel looked down the hallway toward Emma's room. I already disappeared, he said. They followed me home. Silence settled between them. Finally, she spoke softer. Whitmore won't stop. Daniel met her gaze. Neither would I. She nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. Then I hope you remember how to finish a war, she said. Daniel smiled faintly. I never forgot, he replied. To that evening, Whitmore made his move. A court filing, emergency injunction. Fraud allegations tied to Daniel's old corporate ghosts. By midnight, headlines whispered uncertainty. By morning, they shouted it. Emma saw Daniel's face on the screen before he could turn it off. Daddy, she said slowly. Why are they saying your name like that? Daniel knelt in front of her, heart steady despite the weight pressing in. Because when people lose control, he said, they try to change the story. Are we in trouble? Daniel shook his head. No, he said. They are. What took you across the city? Whitmore poured a drink with shaking hands. He had forced Daniel into the open. Or so he thought. What Whitmore couldn't see, was the quiet movement already underway. Old allies reactivated. Old agreements remembered. Files unlocked by people who owed Daniel favors that had never expired. The city didn't turn against Whitmore overnight. It leaned, and when a city leans far enough, gravity does the rest. The first arrest happened at dawn. Not Whitmore. Not yet. A junior partner at Northline was pulled from his townhouse in handcuffs while his neighbors watched from behind curtains. The charges were technical. Fraud, misrepresentation, failure to disclose. But the timing was surgical. By noon, 2 more followed. By evening, the news stopped calling it a review and started calling it a reckoning. Daniel watched none of it live. He walked Emma to school like he always did, waited until she disappeared through the doors, then stood across the street a moment longer than usual. A black sedan rolled past slowly. Different plates. Same intent. Daniel memorized them. 2 Whitmore slammed his office door hard enough to rattle the glass. They're sacrificing pawns. He snapped at his legal team. This is theater. It's momentum. One lawyer corrected. And it's turning public. Whitmore poured another drink. Then we change the public, he said. If Carter wants sunlight, we burn him in it. Boot. The article dropped an hour later. Anonymous sources. Carefully worded accusations. A narrative built on half-truths and old smoke. Daniel Carter disgraced executive returns amid financial chaos. Emma didn't see the headline, but her classmates' parents did. That afternoon, she came home quieter than usual. One of the moms asked if we were bad people, Emma said. Voice small. Daniel felt something tighten behind his ribs. He sat beside her on the couch. Did she listen when you answered? He asked. Emma shook her head. Daniel nodded. Then she wasn't asking, he said. That night Daniel opened another file. Deeper. Older. This one wasn't about money. It was about men. Men Whitmore had ruined quietly. Men who'd lost careers, families, futures. Daniel made 3 calls. None went to voicemail. 2 Whitmore's allies began to wobble. A councilman canceled a fundraiser. A bank delayed a loan. A donor returned a call after weeks of silence. Just long enough to say, I can't be seen right now. Whitmore noticed the pattern. Fear. Not of him. Of something else. He stared at the city map on his wall, pins marking projects and profits, and felt the first crack in his certainty. Carter wasn't fighting like a man who wanted revenge. He was fighting like a man who wanted an ending. Daniel stood on the porch late that night, the house quiet behind him. Marcus's voice came through the phone, low and measured. They're pulling records from jurisdictions that don't usually cooperate. Marcus said. That means someone high enough decided to stop protecting him. Good, Daniel replied. You sure about the next step? Marcus asked. Once this starts, there's no pulling it back. Daniel looked up at the darkened windows of his neighborhood, at homes that had survived decades of neglect and greed. They came for my daughter, he said. This ends one way. Lou, the next morning, federal agents entered Whitmore's office building. Not loudly. Not dramatically. They simply walked in and didn't leave. Whitmore watched from his office as elevators locked down and faces drained of color. His phone rang. Private line. He answered with a steady hand. It's Carter, the voice said. Whitmore closed his eyes. You could have stayed gone, he said. Daniel's voice was calm. So could you, he replied. The line went dead. Whitmore stared at the city again. It didn't look like it belonged to him anymore. It looked like it was waiting. Whitmore's lawyers worked through the night, But lawyers are only useful when rules still matter to the people enforcing them. By morning, they didn't. Subpoenas stacked. Accounts froze. Board members stopped answering calls. Whitmore sat alone in a conference room that used to fill when he entered. He hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. For the first time in his career, no one was managing the narrative for him. 2. Daniel learned about the raid the way he learned most things now, quietly. A message from Marcus. 2 words, "It's begun." Daniel deleted it and went back to making breakfast. Emma watched him carefully. "You're not nervous?" she said. Daniel flipped a pancake. "No," he replied. "I'm focused." She considered that. "Is this like when Mom used to get very calm before she fixed something broken?" Emma asked. Daniel paused. "Yes," he said softly. "Exactly like that." By afternoon, Whitmore tried something desperate. He leaked. Not documents, not accusations. Fear. Anonymous tips to reporters suggesting national security concerns, shadow investors, unnamed threats. Anything that might scare regulators into slowing down. It backfired. Nothing enrages oversight more than manipulation disguised as patriotism. At 3:42 p.m., Whitmore was informed that his personal accounts were under review. Not Northline's. His. That was the moment he understood the truth. Carter wasn't just attacking him. He was removing him. Daniel sat in a parked car outside Emma's school when his phone rang again. Marcus didn't sound relieved. "He's cornered," Marcus said. "That's when men like him get reckless." "I know." Daniel replied. "You need protection." Daniel watched children pour out of the building, backpacks bouncing, laughter cutting through the tension like light through fog. "I already have it," he said. Emma spotted him and ran. 2. That night, a car followed them home too closely. Daniel didn't speed up, didn't slow down. He turned down a side street and parked under a broken streetlight. The car rolled past once, then stopped. 2 men stepped out. Not city, not corporate. This was Whitmore's last currency. Daniel locked the doors, told Emma to stay down, and stepped out into the light. "Go home," Daniel said, evenly. The men laughed. They didn't recognize him. That was their mistake. What happened next was fast, controlled, silent. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, Daniel was sitting on the curb, jacket torn, breathing steady. The men were alive, barely coherent, and very eager to explain who sent them. Whitmore received the call just before midnight. "Turn yourself in," his lawyer said. "Now. It's the only move left." Whitmore stared at the city skyline from his penthouse, lights everywhere, none of them for him. Daniel tucked Emma into bed later than usual. She clutched his sleeve. "Are the bad people gone?" she asked. Daniel kissed her forehead. "Almost," he said. Down the hall, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Daniel answered. "Mr. Carter," a calm voice said. "This is the U.S. Attorney's office. We'd like to speak with you." Daniel looked at his daughter, safe and asleep. "Yes," he said. "I think it's time." Daniel arrived at the federal building just after sunrise. No press. No spectacle. That was intentional. He passed through security like any other man with nothing to hide, sat in a windowless room, and waited. The agents who entered didn't rush. They studied him the way people do when they're unsure whether they're facing a witness or a force. "We know who you are," one of them finally said. "And we know who you were." Daniel nodded. "Then you know why I'm here." They slid a file across the table. Inside were years of transactions, shell companies, buried partnerships, some Daniels, some Whitmores, all tangled together by design. "You could make this very complicated," the agent said, "or very simple." Daniel closed the file gently. "I'm not here to protect myself," he said. "I'm here to finish something I should have finished a long time ago." That was the moment the room changed. Whitmore turned himself in an hour later. No cameras. No defiant statements. Just a man walking into a courthouse he'd once owned in everything but name. Inside, the story unraveled faster than anyone expected. Once one thread broke, the rest followed. Emails, bribes, threats disguised as favors. Men Whitmore thought were loyal remembered suddenly how heavy the truth could be. Daniel walked out of the federal building at noon. The sun felt unfamiliar on his face. Marcus waited across the street. "You're sure?" Marcus asked. "Once this goes public, there's no putting the mask back on." Daniel watched people pass, ordinary lives, unknowing. "I don't need the mask anymore," he said. "I just needed the city to breathe." Marcus nodded, respect quiet and absolute. That evening, Emma met him at the door with a drawing. It showed a small house. 2 figures holding hands. Rain above them, but breaking. "We're staying, right?" she asked. Daniel knelt, holding the paper like it was worth more than any contract he'd ever signed. "Yes," he said. "This is home." The news broke the next morning. Not as a scandal, as a reckoning. Whitmore's empire dismantled in careful language. Daniel Carter's name mentioned only once, deep in the article, easy to miss. That was exactly how Daniel wanted it. Too late that night, Daniel stood on the porch again. The street was quiet. The watchers were gone. For the first time since Sarah's funeral, the house felt still in a way that didn't hurt. Daniel went inside, turned off the lights, and closed the door on a life that no longer needed hiding. Some battles aren't about winning. They're about making sure no one else ever has to fight them again. The city didn't celebrate. There were no parades. No speeches about justice restored. Power rarely announces when it's been corrected. It simply rearranges itself and moves on. But Daniel felt the difference anyway. It showed up in small things. The way neighbors lingered longer on the sidewalk. Conversations no longer hushed when he passed. The way the bank letter arrived. Not with threats this time, but apologies wrapped in polite language. The way the black sedans never came back. Emma noticed it first. "People smile at us more," she said one morning as they walked to school. Daniel glanced around. She was right. "They're less afraid," he said. "Of us?" she asked. "No," Daniel replied. "Of doing the wrong thing." Whitmore's arraignment was scheduled quietly, but word traveled fast. Men who once shared stages with him suddenly remembered conflicts. Partners who'd benefited from his shadow claimed ignorance. The empire didn't fall in one piece. It crumbled. And as it did, other names surfaced. Names Daniel hadn't touched directly, but had left exposed to daylight. The city began cleaning itself. Slowly. Reluctantly. But genuinely. Daniel received an offer 3 days later, not from a corporation, not from the government, from a foundation, urban renewal, ethical development, oversight with real teeth. Marcus brought it to him, folded neatly, like an olive branch offered with respect. "They want you public?" Marcus said. "Advisory role? Real authority?" Daniel read it once. Then again. He handed it back. "No," he said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You could change things." "I already did," Daniel replied. "Doesn't need me in front. It needs me where I've always been." "Invisible?" Marcus asked. "Accountable?" Daniel corrected. That evening, Daniel and Emma sat on the front steps, watching the sky turn gold. Emma leaned against him. "Daddy," she said after a while, "are you a hero?" Daniel thought about boardrooms and bruises. About silence and storms. About the cost of being seen. "No," he said finally. "I'm a dad who didn't leave." Emma smiled, satisfied with that answer. Inside, Daniel opened the laptop one last time. He shut down accounts. Transferred oversight. Dissolved structures that no longer needed to exist. What remained was lean, quiet, purposeful. Before closing it, he renamed the final folder. Not Carter Holdings. Not anything traceable. Just a single word. Home. That night, rain fell gently. Not as a warning, not as a threat. Just rain. Daniel listened to it from the doorway of Emma's room, watching her sleep without fear, without questions she wasn't ready to carry. He turned off the light and closed the door softly. The city outside kept moving. But for the first time in a long while, it moved without pressing down on him. And Daniel Carter let himself rest. The ripple spread farther than Daniel expected. Not louder, wider. By the end of the week, 3 separate development projects across the city stalled without explanation. Permits delayed, financing paused, partnerships quietly dissolved. No press releases, no accusations. Just a sudden understanding among powerful people that certain lines had reappeared, and crossing them now came with consequences. Daniel heard about it from Marcus, who stopped by the house just before sunset. "You didn't just end Whitmore," Marcus said, leaning against the porch railing. "You reminded the city that it can still say no." Daniel watched Emma chalk drawings on the sidewalk. "That wasn't the goal," he said. Marcus smiled thinly. "It never is. That's why it works." Someone tested the silence 2 nights later. A zoning appeal appeared in the system, filed against Daniel's block, technical and harmless on the surface, but intentional. A probe. A way of asking, "Are you still watching?" Daniel saw it within an hour. He didn't respond. The appeal was withdrawn the next morning. Emma felt the shift in her own way. Her teacher called Daniel in for a meeting. Not about trouble, but about attention. "She's very observant," the teacher said. "Sometimes too much for her age." Daniel nodded. "She's learning when to speak," he said. "And when not to." The teacher asked gently. Daniel thought about that. "No," he replied. "When to listen." Across town, a different meeting took place. 3 men, 1 woman. No assistants. They didn't speak Whitmore's name. They spoke about exposure. About unpredictability. About Daniel Carter. "He doesn't want power," one of them said. "That makes him dangerous." The woman tapped the table once. "Or controllable." Silence followed. Finally, one man shook his head. "No," he said. "Men like that don't get controlled. They get waited out." That night, Daniel sat alone in the living room after Emma fell asleep. The house was quieter than it had been in months, but the quiet felt heavier now. Winning didn't bring relief. It brought space, and space made room for things he'd been holding back. Sarah's laugh. Her voice when she said his name. The way she used to touch his arm when she knew he was carrying too much. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time since the funeral, the grief didn't knock him down. It sat beside him. He let it. His phone buzzed once. Unknown number. A single message. "You change the rules. Others will want to change you." Daniel stared at the screen, then deleted the message without replying. He turned off the phone, stood, and walked down the hallway. Emma slept curled on her side, peaceful, unaware of cities and rules and men who mistook patience for weakness. Daniel adjusted her blanket and whispered a promise she wouldn't remember hearing, but would feel every day of her life. "I'm here," he said. Outside, the city held its breath, not because it feared him, because it didn't yet know what came next. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It waits until the danger passes, until the house is quiet, until the mind no longer has a crisis to solve. Then it asks to be acknowledged. Daniel felt it on a Sunday afternoon, standing in the grocery aisle, staring at a brand of pasta Sarah used to buy without thinking. He couldn't remember why she preferred it, only that she did. The realization hit harder than any threat Whitmore had ever made. He left the cart where it was and walked out into the parking lot, breathing slowly until the tightness eased. Winning had cost him something he hadn't prepared to pay. That night, Emma asked a question Daniel had been bracing for. "Daddy," she said, curled beside him on the couch, "are you sad because of me?" The question landed quietly. Precisely. "No." Daniel said immediately, then stopped himself. "I'm sad because I loved your mom very much, And because loving someone doesn't end when they're gone. And Emma thought about that. Is that why you fight so hard? She asked. So nothing takes more people away. Daniel swallowed. Yes, he said. That's exactly why. Emma rested her head against his chest. Then it's okay to be sad, she said. Mom said sad means you cared enough. Daniel closed his eyes and held her tighter than he meant to. 2. The next day, Daniel declined 3 calls he didn't want to answer. 2 were offers. 1 was a warning disguised as advice. Marcus stopped trying after the 3rd voicemail. Instead, he showed up. You're burning out? Marcus said bluntly. You think because the noise stopped, the cost did too. Daniel didn't argue. I don't know how to stop, he admitted. Marcus nodded. That's the problem. You were built to endure, not to recover. They stood in silence for a long moment. You don't owe the city anything anymore? Marcus said finally. Daniel looked at the house. At the scuffed doorframe where Emma's height was marked in pencil. At the window Sarah used to lean against when she waited for him to come home. I owe her a father who's present, Daniel said. Not just capable. That evening, Daniel did something radical. He said no. No to meetings. No to strategy. No to the quiet expectation that he would always be available when things went wrong. He cooked dinner slowly. Helped Emma with homework. Watched a movie he barely paid attention to. And when the house went quiet again, the grief returned. But this time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like healing beginning to hurt. Before bed, Daniel opened a small wooden box he hadn't touched since the funeral. Inside were things without value to anyone else. A receipt from their first apartment. A hospital bracelet. A note Sarah had once left on the fridge. You don't have to carry everything alone. Daniel folded the note carefully and placed it back. For the first time since the city tried to crush him, Daniel allowed himself to believe something fragile and dangerous. That surviving wasn't the same as living, and that the next fight wouldn't be against men like Whitmore, but against the parts of himself that didn't know how to let go. The offer arrived the next morning in an envelope too thick to be ignored. No logos. No return address. Just Daniel Carter's name written carefully, as if whoever sent it understood the weight it carried. Daniel didn't open it right away. He made breakfast. Walked Emma to school. Nodded to neighbors who had started greeting him again, not with curiosity this time, but with something closer to trust. Only after the house was empty did he sit at the kitchen table and break the seal. Inside was a proposal that tried very hard not to sound like one. A position. Advisory in name, authority in practice. Oversight across multiple cities, not just one. It promised safeguards. Transparency. A chance to prevent men like Whitmore before they ever learned how to hide. And beneath the careful language was the real question. Would you step back into the light? 2. Daniel folded the letter and placed it beside his coffee. He didn't feel tempted. He felt tired. Marcus called an hour later, as if summoned by the decision Daniel hadn't yet made. They're serious, Marcus said. This isn't a trap. It's an invitation. Invitations come with expectations, Daniel replied. Yes, Marcus admitted. And with reach. Daniel looked around the kitchen. This room had held whispered arguments and quiet laughter. Late night plans and early morning panic. It had survived loss the way people do, by absorbing it into the walls. I spent years dismantling systems like this, Daniel said. I don't know if I can build one without becoming it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then maybe that's why it has to be you, he said. 2. That afternoon, Daniel picked Emma up from school early. They walked home slower than usual. Did something happen? Emma asked. No, Daniel said. Something might. She accepted that. Then asked the question she always did when things shifted. Does this mean we're moving? Daniel stopped walking. No, he said firmly. This means I'm deciding how much of the world I let back in. Emma frowned. Why would you let it in at all? Daniel smiled. Because if I don't, he said, someone else will. And they won't care the way you do. Emma considered this carefully. Then she nodded. Okay, she said, but promise you won't forget dinner. Daniel laughed softly. I promise, he said. That night, Daniel dreamed for the first time in weeks. Not of boardrooms or threats. Of rain on a city street. Of Sarah standing under an awning, smiling the way she did when she knew he was overthinking again. You don't have to fix everything, she said. Just don't walk away from what matters. Daniel woke before dawn, heart steady. He sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the letter one last time. Then, he turned it over and wrote a single sentence on the back. I'll help, but only if I answer to the people, not the power. He sealed it in a new envelope. When the sun rose, Daniel Carter stood at the doorway of a life he hadn't planned to enter again. Not as a king, not as a savior, but as a man who knew exactly what unchecked power could do, and chose to stand in its way anyway. The response came faster than Daniel expected. Too fast. By noon the next day, the envelope he'd sent was already back on his kitchen table, hand-delivered, no postage, no signature. Just a quiet acknowledgement that his terms had been read and accepted. That should have comforted him. It didn't. Power that moves quickly is rarely patient. And patience was the only kind Daniel trusted. 2. The knock came just after sunset. Not sharp, not aggressive. Familiar. Daniel opened the door and felt the past step into his house. Still answering your own door, the man said. Jonah Reed looked older than Daniel remembered. Thinner. Harder around the eyes. The kind of man whose life had been sharpened by things he didn't talk about. They hadn't seen each other in 8 years. Didn't think you'd find me, Daniel said. Jonah gave a faint smile. You stopped hiding. They stood there a moment too long, measuring what time had changed. Daniel stepped aside. Come in. Emma watched from the hallway as Jonah took off his coat. Who's that? She asked. A friend, Daniel said, then corrected himself. An old one? Jonah knelt, bringing himself to her level. You must be Emma, he said. Your dad talked about you before you were even born. Emma studied him the way she studied everyone who came too close to Daniel. Are you staying for dinner? She asked. Jonah glanced at Daniel. If I'm invited, he said. Daniel nodded. You are. 2. They ate quietly. Jonah listened more than he spoke, watched more than he ate. Finally, when Emma was in her room, Jonah leaned back in exile. You stirred things up, he said. So I've heard, Daniel replied. This isn't about Whitmore. Jonah continued. That was necessary. But it opened doors. Daniel's expression didn't change. Which ones? He asked. Jonah met his eyes. People who don't steal. He said. They replace. Daniel understood immediately. There's always someone waiting, he said. Yes, Jonah agreed. And this one thinks they're the solution. Jonah slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were reports that didn't look official because they weren't meant to. Clean companies. Clean records. Clean intentions. Too clean. There, consolidating quietly, Jonah said, under the banner of reform. Daniel asked. Jonah hesitated. That's the problem, he said. No single name. Just a philosophy. They believe cities need guardians. People above the mess. Daniel closed the folder slowly. I've met men like that, he said. They never stay clean. Jonah nodded. They've noticed you, he said. And they're deciding whether you're an asset or an obstacle. Daniel looked toward Emma's room. Then they're late, he said. I've already decided what they are. Jonah stood. I hoped you'd say that, he said. Because if you hadn't, I wouldn't have come alone. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Jonah paused at the door. "Meaning this time?" he said. "The threat doesn't come loud. It comes reasonable." The door closed behind him. Daniel remained at the table, hands folded, understanding fully now. Whitmore had been greed. This would be conviction. And conviction, unchecked, was far more dangerous. Conviction wore better suits than greed. Daniel saw it within days. No threats, no pressure, just introductions. A professor turned policy advisor requesting a conversation. A nonprofit director praising his integrity a little too precisely. A city planner inviting him to speak on a panel about ethical redevelopment. Each interaction was polite, measured, reasonable, and each one circled the same idea without naming it. Leadership without accountability was dangerous. But leadership with the right people could save cities. Daniel declined every invitation. He didn't argue, didn't accuse. He simply said no. That unsettled them more than resistance ever could. Jonah confirmed it 2 nights later. "They're mapping you," Jonah said over a secure line. "Trying to understand your limits." "They won't," Daniel replied. "No," Jonah replied. "Because you don't operate from ideology." Emma felt the tension without understanding it. She began sleeping with her light on again. Started asking Daniel to sit with her longer at night. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, she asked quietly, "Are you going to disappear like before?" Daniel felt the question land deep. "Testu?" he said firmly. "Never again?" She nodded, but her grip on his hand didn't loosen. "Tu?" The first real test came disguised as kindness. A foundation offered to rebuild the playground at Emma's school. No strings. No branding. Just a gift. Parents celebrated. Teachers thanked them. Daniel read the paperwork carefully. Buried in the language was influence. Future access. Subtle oversight. He declined on behalf of the school. The playground wasn't rebuilt. And that, more than anything, revealed the truth. June Ona arrived unannounced the next morning. "They're frustrated," he said. "You don't respond the way they planned." "What do they want?" Daniel asked. Jonah hesitated. "Legitimacy," he said. "They want to rule without looking like they rule." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's worse than Whitmore," he said. At least he knew what he was. That night, Daniel walked the neighborhood alone. He passed houses marked for renewal. Empty lots waiting to be improved. Communities that survived only because no one had noticed them yet. He understood what the new threat didn't. You couldn't protect a city by standing above it. You had to stand inside it. And accept that sometimes it would push back. When he returned home, Jonah was waiting on the porch. "They've made a decision," Jonah said. "So have I," Daniel replied. Jonah searched his face. "They won't come at you directly," he warned. "They'll come through what you love." Daniel's gaze hardened. Not with fear, but clarity. "Then they'll learn something important," he said. Jonah nodded. "That you don't negotiate with your child." Daniel opened the door. "No," he said quietly. "That you don't get to touch her at all." The message didn't come as a threat. It came as a schedule change. Emma's school called just after noon to say her afternoon activity had been canceled. Pick up would be early. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Daniel felt the shift anyway. He left immediately. The street outside the school was busier than usual. A temporary sign announced upcoming infrastructure assessments. 2 unfamiliar vans were parked too neatly near the curb. Daniel parked a block away and walked. He didn't hurry. Didn't draw attention. Inside the building, he spotted Emma near the office, backpack on, teacher speaking softly to her. Relief came fast, then stopped. The man standing nearby wasn't staff. He wore a visitor badge clipped just slightly crooked. His posture was relaxed, observant, watching Emma. Daniel positioned himself between them without a word. The man smiled. "Mr. Carter?" he said. "We haven't met." "No," Daniel replied. "And we won't." The man raised his hands calmly. "No harm intended," he said. "Just a conversation." Daniel looked at the teacher. "We're leaving." The man didn't block them. That was the point. To outside, Jonah was already there. "You felt it?" Jonah said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "They wanted me to notice. They wanted to show proximity without contact," Jonah said. "It's a line." Daniel opened the car door for Emma. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, eyes wide. Daniel knelt. "No," he said. "Someone else did." "Do too." That evening, the second message arrived, not to Daniel, to the community board. A proposal. A public forum. A vision statement for protective redevelopment. The same foundation, the same clean language. This time Daniel was named. Invited. Referenced. Positioned as an example of cooperation. They were using his reputation as leverage. Jonah read it twice. "They're forcing a public choice," he said. "Stand with them or stand against progress." Daniel folded the paper slowly. "They crossed it?" he said. Jonah didn't ask which line. Daniel spoke at the forum. He hadn't planned to. But when he stood, the room quieted. Not because he was powerful, but because people recognized truth when it entered without decoration. "I've been called a reformer," Daniel said. "And an obstacle. Both by people who don't live here." Murmurs spread. "You don't protect communities by managing them from above," he continued. "You protect them by listening and accepting when they say no." He looked directly at the foundation's representatives. "You don't get to frighten our children to prove your intentions," he said calmly. "That isn't leadership. That's control." The room shifted. Phones lowered. Eyes narrowed. That night, Emma slept in Daniel's bed. She didn't say she was scared. She didn't need to. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, understanding fully now. This wasn't a war for territory. It was a war for permission, and Daniel had just taken it away. Somewhere in the city, reasonable people began planning unreasonable responses. And Daniel Carter prepared to end this. Not loudly. Not violently. But completely. The city didn't erupt after the forum. That was the mistake they made. Men who rely on public outrage expect explosions. They prepare for noise. What followed instead was far more dangerous. Silence. The foundation withdrew its proposal without comment. The vans disappeared. The visitor badges were never mentioned again. On the surface, it looked like retreat. Jonah knew better. "They're not stepping back," he told Daniel. "They're switching methods." Daniel nodded. "They always do." The silent war began with paperwork. Community grants delayed without explanation. Inspection schedules shuffled. Emails returned slower than usual. If at all, nothing illegal. Nothing provable. To just friction applied evenly across the neighborhood, designed to exhaust rather than confront. Daniel countered, the same way. He didn't escalate. He coordinated. He connected people who had never been in the same room before. Local owners, teachers, retired planners who remembered how the system used to work before it forgot who it served. He didn't lead meetings. He listened. That made him dangerous in ways the foundation hadn't modeled for. Emma felt the difference too. More adults came by the house, not strangers but neighbors. They brought food, tools, stories. One evening, Emma watched from the steps as Daniel helped an elderly man fix a fence. "Are they your team?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "No," he said. "They're our neighbors." She nodded slowly, as if committing the distinction to memory. Jonah delivered the next piece of intelligence quietly. "They're split," he said. "Some want to remove you. Others want to absorb you. And the rest?" Daniel asked. Jonah hesitated. "They're afraid you're teaching people they don't need permission anymore." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "That fear," he said, "is well earned." The foundation made its final mistake a week later. They released a report. Thick, polished, authoritative. It framed Daniel's neighborhood as structurally unsustainable, and recommended state oversight. 4. The residents' protection. No accusations. No villains. Just inevitability. Daniel read it once. Then he handed it to Jonah. They think systems beat people? Daniel said. They forget systems are made of people. Jonah looked it up. What do you want to do? Daniel glanced toward the window, where Emma was laughing with 2 other kids, chalk dust on her hands. We don't attack, he said. We document. Within 48 hours, the counter report went live. Not from Daniel. From the community, maintenance logs, volunteer rebuilds, school attendance data, testimonies recorded on phones, raw and unfiltered, for truth presented without anger. The city paid attention, so did the foundation. That night, Jonah's phone buzzed once. They're bleeding support, he said. Not fast, but steadily. Daniel exhaled slowly. Good, he said. Let them feel what it's like to lose without being able to blame anyone. Jonah studied him. You're not fighting them, he said. Daniel shook his head. No, he replied. I'm replacing them. Outside, the rain returned. Light, patient, unstoppable. Between the raindrops, something old and fragile was learning how to stand on its own again. The shift became visible when the city stopped asking who was in charge. They started asking who was showing up. Permit offices reopened files they had quietly buried. Inspectors returned calls they had learned to ignore. Small corrections began appearing in places no one had announced were broken. No speeches. No directives. Just momentum. 2. The foundation felt it immediately. 1 board member resigned. For personal reasons. Another requested an internal review that never reached the press but spread panic through private channels. Jonah brought the update with something close to admiration. They underestimated how much patience you had, he said. And how little appetite you have for credit. Daniel shrugged. Credit distorts judgment. Jonah laughed once. You always were allergic to it. The offer returned. Revised. Less authority, more guardrails. A role defined by constraints rather than power. Daniel read it carefully this time. Not because he wanted it. Because he wanted to understand how badly they needed him to accept. That night, he walked the neighborhood with Emma. Lights glowed in windows that had once gone dark early. Someone had planted flowers where there used to be trash. Emma skipped ahead, then stopped. Daddy, she said. If everyone can fix things together, why don't they always? Daniel considered the question. Because it's easier to believe someone else will, he said. Or that someone else should. Emma frowned. That sounds lonely. Yes, Daniel said. It is. Oos. He declined the offer again. This time, he didn't explain. The foundation responded the only way it had left. They went public. An op-ed appeared in a national paper. Measured, disappointed, concerned about informal power structures and unaccountable influence. Daniel was never named. He didn't have to be. The implication was clear. Jonah watched Daniel read it without reaction. They're trying to force oversight, Jonah said. From above. Daniel folded the paper. They're late, he said. 2-2 The response didn't come from Daniel. It came from the city council chamber, where residents packed the room beyond capacity. Teachers, small business owners, parents, they spoke calmly. Specifically, relentlessly, they didn't defend Daniel. They defended themselves. By the end of the night, the oversight motion was withdrawn. No vote required. 2 later, Daniel sat alone on the porch. The house hummed with life behind him. Jonah leaned against the railing. You know they'll never forgive this, Jonah said. Daniel nodded. That's fine. You've made yourself impossible to remove. Daniel looked out at the street. No, he said. I've made myself unnecessary. Jonah stared at him. That's the most dangerous thing you could be, he said. Daniel smiled faintly. Good, he replied. Then it'll last. The breaking point didn't come with violence. It came with quiet. The meetings slowed. The calls stopped. Even Jonah went a full day without new intelligence. Daniel should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the old weight settling back into his chest, the one that came when a system decided to wait you out. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen, the light over the table the only one still on. He stared at nothing for a long time. Marcus called after midnight. "You're running on fumes," Marcus said. "You don't have to prove anything anymore." Daniel didn't answer right away. "I don't know how to stop being useful," he said finally. Marcus was quiet. "That's not usefulness," he said. "That's survival mode that never turned off." The next morning, Daniel forgot to pack Emma's lunch. It was a small thing. It felt enormous. Emma noticed, of course. She didn't complain. She hugged him instead. "You're doing too much again?" she said softly. The words hit harder than any accusation ever had. Daniel took the day off. No calls, no meetings, no watching. He took Emma to the park, sat on a bench while she climbed and laughed and fell and got back up. For the first time in weeks, he didn't scan the edges, didn't look for patterns. He just watched her exist, and something inside him cracked, not from pressure, from release. Q2. That night, Daniel dreamed of Sarah again. This time she wasn't standing under rain or shadow. She was in their old kitchen, sleeves rolled up, annoyed he hadn't fixed the sink yet. "You don't have to earn rest," she said. "You just have to take it." Daniel woke with tears on his face, and no urge to hide them. Jonah came by the next evening. "I was worried," he admitted. "You went quiet." Daniel nodded. "I needed to remember who I was before all this." "And?" Jonah asked. Daniel looked toward Emma's room. "I was a man who came home," he said. Jonah smiled sadly. "You still are." The foundation made one last internal push that week. It failed without resistance. No backlash. No outrage. Just disinterest. They had lost the only leverage that ever mattered. Attention. Daniel sat with Emma on the couch later, her head on his shoulder. "Daddy," she said sleepily. "Are we safe now?" Daniel kissed her hair. "Yes," he said. "Because we didn't become what we were fighting." Emma smiled, already drifting. For the first time since the city tried to take everything from him, Daniel believed it. Not because the threat was gone, but because he was no longer alone in carrying it. The end didn't arrive as a collapse. It arrived as clarity. The investigation Jonah had quietly shepherded for months finally surfaced. Not as a scandal, not as an exposé, but as a comprehensive audit requested by agencies that rarely asked for permission. No accusations. No headlines screaming outrage. Just findings. Conflicts of interest. Policy capture. Decision loops that routed community outcomes through private boards no one had voted for. The foundation wasn't indicted. It was exposed. And exposure, Daniel knew, was worse. The report was dense, technical. Impossible to spin without admitting its conclusions. Within hours, partner organizations issued statements distancing themselves. Within days, funding froze. The foundation's language shifted overnight. From certainty to cooperation, from leadership to listening. Too late. The city had learned a new reflex. It asked questions. To who? Daniel was asked to testify. He declined. Not out of fear. Out of precision. He submitted a written statement instead, short, factual, stripped of opinion. This isn't about who should lead. It's about who should decide. That sentence was quoted everywhere. Jonah brought the final update on a quiet afternoon. "They're dissolving," he said. "Not officially, but functionally." Daniel nodded. "And the neighborhood?" he asked. Jonah smiled. "Untouchable. For now." Daniel exhaled long and slow. That evening, the community gathered without organizing it. People brought chairs. Food stories. No speeches were planned. None were needed. Someone asked Daniel to say something. He stood, uncomfortable, and spoke anyway. "Test, you don't owe anyone gratitude for not being controlled," he said. "And you don't need permission to protect what you love." That was all. People clapped, not loudly, not long. Just enough. 2 later, Daniel walked home with Emma under a sky clearing after rain. She skipped over puddles, choosing carefully where to land. "Daddy," she said, "is this what winning looks like?" Daniel watched her jump. "No," he said. "This is what ending looks like." She smiled. "Ah, I like this better." "So do I," Daniel said. 2. That night, Daniel deleted the last secure folder on his laptop. No backups. No contingencies. Just trust, placed where it belonged. Outside, the city breathed easier, not because someone saved it, but because the people inside it remembered how to stand. And Daniel Carter, once invisible by necessity, finally became something else entirely. At peace. Legacy doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly, the way dust does in places people return to often. Weeks passed without incident. Not because nothing happened, but because what happened no longer needed Daniel in the middle of it. Neighborhood meetings continued without him. Emails came addressed to committees, not names. Problems were solved before they reached crisis. Daniel watched it unfold from a distance he'd never allowed himself before. And it worked. Telly Emma started a new habit. Every evening, she wrote one thing on a scrap of paper and taped it to the fridge. Sometimes it was small. "I learned how to divide today." Mrs. Alvarez smiled at me. Sometimes it was bigger. "Daddy didn't leave." Daniel never commented on the notes. He didn't need to. One afternoon, Daniel found himself walking past the old redevelopment office. The one Whitmore used to occupy. The sign was gone. The windows dark. A temporary notice announced a future use still undecided. Daniel stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Not out of triumph, out of closure. He turned away without looking back. 2. Jonna called that evening. "I'm being reassigned," he said. "Different city. Same problems." Daniel smiled. "They always move the mess. Never the lesson." Jonna hesitated. "You could come with me," he said. Officially this time. Daniel looked at Emma, curled up on the couch with a book too big for her hands. "No," he said gently. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Jonna exhaled. "I thought you'd say that," he said. "Take care of her." Daniel's voice didn't waver. "I will." That night, Daniel found the height marks on the doorframe again. He added a new line. Emma stood still, grinning, proud of the proof that time was moving forward, and that she was safe enough to grow. "Do you think I'll remember all this when I'm older?" she asked. Daniel thought carefully. "No," he said. "But you'll remember how it felt." She smiled, satisfied. Test. Before bed, Daniel stepped outside one last time. The street was calm. Ordinary. The kind of ordinary people mistake for boring, until they lose it. Daniel leaned against the railing, rain starting again, light and patient. He didn't feel invisible anymore. He felt finished. Not in the sense of ending, but in the sense of something finally set down. Inside, Emma laughed at something in her book. Daniel went back in, closed the door, and let the city keep moving without him. That, he understood now, was the real victory. Test. The rain came in the early morning, the gentle kind that doesn't rush anything. Daniel woke before his alarm, not from worry or habit, but from the quiet certainty that there was nothing he needed to be ahead of anymore. He made coffee. Watched the steam rise. Listened to the city begin its slow, ordinary breathing. When Emma padded into the kitchen in her socks, hair still tangled with sleep, she didn't ask if he was busy. She asked what they were doing today. Daniel smiled. "I don't know yet," he said. "What do you think?" She considered this seriously, then grinned. "Something normal," she said. "That sounds perfect," Daniel replied. They walked the neighborhood later, after the rain eased. Puddles dotted the sidewalk. reflecting pieces of sky between cracks and concrete. Emma hopped from one to the next, careful and joyful, choosing her steps. Daniel followed, unhurried. Between the raindrops, life happened. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. They passed the old lot where developers once planned glass and steel. Now it held a small garden. Unplanned, imperfect, alive. Emma stopped. "Can we help here sometimes?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes," he said. "If they'll have us." Dosed. That evening, Daniel sat at the table with a notebook he hadn't opened in years. Not a ledger. Not a plan. Just blank pages. He wrote one line. "Be here." Then he closed it. As night fell, Daniel tucked Emma into bed. She yawned. Eyes heavy. "Daddy," she murmured. "You don't look tired anymore." Daniel kissed her forehead. "That's because I'm not running?" he said. She smiled and drifted off. Daniel stood by the window for a moment, watching the streetlights glow against wet pavement. The city was still complicated. Still imperfect. But it wasn't leaning on him. He turned off the light and joined the quiet. Outside, rain fell softly. Never enough to drown anything. Just enough to remind the world to slow down. Between the raindrops, Daniel Carter lived. And that was enough.